Good morning. Welcome to the apocalypse. Archetype of the apocalypse. Two words that are not used a lot. We're going to put them together and sort of do an introduction or a sort of allurement to this class starting Wednesday night. If any of this appeals to you, come and join us to go into it much more deeply. Now, the idea of archetype of the apocalypse. This morning we're going to look at three facts or aspects: the meaning of the phrase, the purpose of it, and some examples, quick examples. So first of all, this word archetype. Archetype, defined, patterns or blueprints of consciousness found in every person and culture, ancient and modern. In other words, the idea of archetypes is that the whole cosmos, but specifically the human race, has certain patterns of consciousness that we all participate in. And one of those patterns of consciousness is apocalypse. We'll say more about what that means. The meaning of apocalypse. Apocalypse does not mean destruction or catastrophe. How many of you are surprised by that? You ask the majority of people, what's apocalypse mean? Destruction, catastrophe. It's one small piece of what it means. The term apocalypse actually means to unveil, to pull back the curtain, to peel a layer away in order to reveal something new. Now, the catastrophic part of that is the peeling part. But the most important part is the revealing part. The New Testament book of Revelation was originally titled in Greek, the Apocalypse, because apocalypse means the same thing as revelation, to unveil, to reveal, to peel back. So the archetype of the apocalypse is the idea that there is a universal pattern of consciousness found in every individual and in every culture that is an ongoing process of peeling back the old in order to reveal the new. So there is this process of the archetype of the apocalypse, to reveal a new layer or level of reality or a new realm, to reveal a new way of seeing old information. This is an apocalyptic experience. Aha! I see something now that I didn't see before. That's an apocalypse. This unveiling, revealing, peeling away, and bringing forth requires a threefold process. And that threefold process is this. You have to create something, you have to destroy something, and you have to recreate it. That's an apocalypse. And each of us is in this process. You brought your new created self here today, yes? And guess what's going on in certain parts of your life? If we had a confessional and you could all come up here in line, you could all come in and confess there are some areas of catastrophe going on right now. Yes? Amen. All right. Anybody without any catastrophes? Come on, there's usually one or two that are like lying. No, sorry. So, creation, good. Catastrophe, typically we don't like that so much, but it is archetypal. It's a pattern. It's the way we move. Because through that catastrophe comes recreation. Something new comes out of it. Tolkien, the great author, coined a phrase to describe this process. Eucatastrophe. Have you heard that before? When you put the EU in front of a word, it means good or well, like eulogy, good word. Eucatastrophe is a good disaster. And Tolkien said, I love to tell stories, I love to read stories, and humans in general are attracted to stories that show a beneficial outcome to a horrible situation. Once you go through it, Kathy Ann over at CSL says the difference between tragedy and comedy is about 3 years. You understand? We look back and go, wow, that was really quite a time, and I can kind of laugh about it. But in the midst of it, sometimes suicide seems like the only way out of that catastrophe. So this is what the apocalypse of the archetype, or the archetype of the apocalypse means. Focuses primarily on the catastrophe part and the recreation, because the creation's already there. The creation, that self that is here, is just kind of walking into the next catastrophe in order that a recreation might come from it. So that's the meaning. Number two, the purpose of the archetype of the apocalypse. What's the purpose of these experiences? To obliterate the old heavens and the old earth in order to create the new heavens and the new earth. That's what the book of Revelation, that's how it ends. If you go to the biblical narrative and you start with the book of Genesis, how does it begin? In the beginning, God created the heavens, and the earth. You go all the way through the story, and there is a coherence to that story. You go all the way through the story, and you end in the Revelation or the Apocalypse, which says the old heavens and the old earth passed away, and there came a new heavens and a new earth. This is the thread that ties that narrative together. It is a story of redemption and recreation, and that's what the archetype of the apocalypse is. Now, psychologically and spiritually, an apocalypse aims to unveil or reveal a new personal self and a new emerging socio-political or cultural order. In other words, the archetype of the apocalypse, creation, what's the second one? Catastrophe, recreation, works in each of us individually and in every collective. Whether that collective is a relationship, every relationship is in an apocalypse of the archetype of the apocalypse. Amen? It's true. Talked to a woman years ago in a class. She raised her hand and said, I've been married 6 times. People kind of went, woo. She goes, no, to the same man. She says, we've just gone through at least 6 major catastrophes, and we have a new relationship that has come out of each one. Anybody who's been in a relationship with children or parents or self or a partner, you know what this means. We're always going through the end of the old romance, and one of 2 things typically happens in that catastrophic end. What is it? In a relationship. We go look for another apocalypse. You will find one. Or you will stay and go through it, and something will be recreated in that process. So that's the purpose of an archetype of the apocalypse. This is how Edinger, in his little masterful little book, Archetype of the Apocalypse, this is how he puts it. And this is what we're going to focus on in the class. This will be our main purpose in the class. He asks, what does the apocalypse mean psychologically? My essential answer is, the apocalypse means the momentous event of the coming of the self into conscious realization. It is a momentous event, literally world-shattering. The shattering of your world as it has been, followed by its reconstitution or recreation. This, in this view, is the way it works. That's why we're always in the midst of some kind of transition. That's why Diane said this topic might be appropriate to this community because you're in the midst of an apocalypse. You understand, right? This building, as I understand it, is going to, like the Tower of Babel, no equivalent. It's coming down. And something new is going to come in its place. In the coming down process, it's going to be catastrophic. In fact, I would imagine you've had 1 or 2 catastrophic board meetings. No? Board meetings in general tend to be catastrophic. I have talked to so many people who have become so disgruntled with church after they got on the board. So when people tell me, I'm going to get on the board, I say, I'm sorry to hear that. Just kind of kidding. But if you don't understand the archetype of the apocalypse, oftentimes we go into the board for the first time, or even a job or a marriage or whatever, thinking this is where the picket fence is built and everything's going to be so wonderful, and it often is for a time. But the inevitable cosmic process is such that it will be either quickly or slowly taken apart, because it has to be reconstructed, recreated. This is called soul making. We are in the process of individuation, and this is what Edinger's talking about here. We become individuals by being taken apart in every facet of our lives and being reconstituted. Purpose of an apocalypse, this revelation of the new self in society is accomplished by using fantastical and shocking images and actions. This is a very important part. Bizarre symbolism is employed because the soul, unlike the rational mind, speaks and learns through symbolic, transrational, metaphorical images. Bizarre, the more bizarre the images, the more it speaks to the soul. The more fodder there is for metaphorical interpretation. What does this mean? In fact, every night we are in bed asleep, we are apocalypticizing. What do we call them? Dreams. Dreams are the sort of autonomic system of the universe that apocalypticizes our consciousness in sleep and takes us apart, and it's the way the dream feels. You wake up and go, what was that? It takes us apart, and if we trust the autonomic system of the psyche like we do the biology, the food knows how to take itself apart and put it back together to make these bodies and replenish the organs. Psychologically, our dreams know how to take things apart in our sleep and put them back together to reconstitute the soul. So there's this beautiful autonomic system that goes not only with the physical body, but with the psyche as well. The part of what we humans can do is come and become more conscious of this process and be participants in it. Does that make sense? And by participating, we can sometimes stop the catastrophe from lasting a decade and reducing it to 9 months, the gestation period. In fact, there's some research that shows that when people participate in their catastrophes, there's about a 9-month to 1 year process where the change can move from beginning to middle to end. But when we resist it, it can go on for a lifetime, or if you're into karma, many. They are meant to get our attention. These images are meant to get our attention and reveal countless symbolic psychological significances for our emerging souls and our society. In other words, these images give us gifts that keep on giving, because to the rational mind, they appear crazy. In fact, I've heard many people say, man, this John in the book of Revelation must have been on LSD. Which, by the way, you know Roger Waters? You know who Roger Waters is? You know where he went when he was very young? They were just forming Pink Floyd, where he went to get a vision for his music. Do you know? He went to the Isle of Patmos, and he went into the cave where John received the apocalypse or the revelation. And with a group of people, the first time and only time I think he ever dropped acid, and he said, I didn't need the acid. There was something about that cave that made Pink Floyd. Is there anybody out there? So, Pink Floyd is an apocalyptic band. That's another class. All right, so the purpose of the apocalypse is to give us these fantastical images in order to take us apart and put us back together again. This is the way C.S. Lewis puts it. He was asked why Tolkien's stories catch on, why this fantasy stories, which an apocalypse is a fantasy story, why they catch on. He says this: because one of the main things the author in a fantasy story or apocalypse wants to say is that the real internal psychic life of people is that of mythical and heroic quality. Much that in a realistic work of nonfiction would be done by character delineation is here done simply by making the character an elf, a dwarf, or a hobbit, or a dragon. As we're going to see in the book of Revelation, there are many of these fantastical characters. Lewis goes on and says about fantasy, the imagined beings have their inside on the outside. I love this. They are visible souls, revealing what the jaded eye cannot or will not see. In other words, when we read fantasy or apocalypse, we kind of put our guard down because we're reading about frickin' elves and dwarves and witches and goblins and wizards and trips out of Kansas to the Wonderland or to the, Oz and Alice Through the Looking Glass. We're sort of disarmed, so we go inside out and we see these stories that begin to reveal aspects of ourselves that we could not see without the story. The guard is let down. And these images, in fact, I believe more and more that much of this revelation goes on not just with the book of Revelation, but in the movies and TV shows that we love, or fantasy books, goes on without our even knowing it. One of my favorite instructors, Dennis Slater, he said that when you read a great novel or watch a great movie, your consciousness changes without you knowing it. That's what Lewis is saying here. There's something about these fantastical stories that change us. The value of myth or apocalypse is that it takes all the things we know and restores to them the rich significance which had been hidden by the veil of familiarity. Love that. By using images like bread, gold, a horse, an apple, which are the roads into a myth or apocalypse, we do not retreat from reality, we rediscover it. So the purpose is to bring us into higher levels of reality. Now, very quickly, what I'm going to do in the last few minutes here is give some slides that show some examples. And if any of these examples capture your attention, join us on Wednesday, and we're going to really, really get into the apocalypse. Number one, the unveiling, the revelation, found in the Bhagavad Gita, where Arjuna, a general who collapses in the bottom of his chariot in a state of deep depression because he can't fight any longer. And his little charioteer, Krishna, talks to him. And in the 11th chapter, Arjuna says, give me an apocalypse, unveil your true self. And in this image, what you see is Lord Krishna unveils himself as the infinite Vishnu. And at the end of this story, Arjuna comes out of it seeing a world he couldn't see before, but the whole time it was right in front of him. The apocalypse is not about bringing some fantastical revelation that's never happened before. It's about showing that in the face of that person you've been living with all these years, there is something way more than you could ever see before. Another apocalypse of the archetype, or archetype of the apocalypse, is the Wizard of Oz. This is the American apocalypse. We've been fed this apocalypse and didn't even know we were getting it because it's so good. It's the unveiling of the wizard. The ego gets exposed. And then suddenly all these other characters gather around him and they say, what? What have you done? You've deceived us. Well, each of those characters is in us. We're all fear, like the cowardly lion. We're all a little ignorant, like the scarecrow. And you get the picture. And here, the images reveal or unveil aspects of the self. The apocalypse of Batman happens to be one of my favorites. Any Batman fans out there? Yes, right on. We'll do a class on that someday. Batman is at home as Bruce Wayne. And he takes off the veil, his clothing. Superman does the same thing. Phone booth, Wonder Woman, all of them. They take it off and they unveil a completely different self, and then they go out into the world and they try to make the world a better place through taking away, through catastrophe, the old and bringing in the new. The apocalypse of Buddhism. Did you know Buddha was an apocalypticist? He was an unveiler. He lived in a palace, a princely palace. He left that palace behind, went out and meditated, and under the Bodhi tree, the veil was opened, and he saw through all of his problems, and he moved into a new self. The apocalypse of Wonder Woman. Same thing as all these superhero comics are basically modern day apocalypses. When I hear people say, oh, I hate the apocalypse, I can't stand that biblical stuff, I go, do you ever read comic books or watch television? Yeah, I say, that's the apocalypse. Another apocalypse, Fantastic Four. Any Fantastic Four fans here? More Batman. The apocalypse of political power. This is an apocalypse we're living in the midst of right now. And part of this class will be to help us see there's nothing wrong going on, even when everything is wrong. You see, there's cosmic wrong, and then there is the political wrong. The political wrong exists. It's there, and I don't care which party you're in, you're looking at the other party going, they're wrong. It's because you're in an apocalypse. Each of us is. And politics is an apocalyptic experience, and it's revealing, if we're conscious, a whole lot about whom? Us. And it's revealing a whole lot about our society, our culture, and our world. The apocalypse of Middle-earth. If you're a Tolkien fan, you know this fantastical imagery, the book of Revelation. The apocalypse of Harry Potter. You get the picture. Finally, the apocalypse of John on the Isle of Patmos, who has a vision and introduces us to all these fantastical theatrical images. In fact, it's fairly well known that when this book was written, it was written as a play, as a drama. And it went to cities all over Asia Minor, that today you can go to Ephesus and the cities it was sent to, and you see these theaters in Ephesus and Pergamum and Sardis and Smyrna. All these ancient Greek Roman cities had theaters, because they came to the theatron, the place of the gods. So when John wrote the book of Revelation, he was essentially saying, when you come to this church, we're going to put on a theatrical drama. We're going to read the little bit of this apocalypse every day and explore these images. They didn't have computers and television, but they had the book of Revelation, the apocalypse. Let's do a quick prayer, if you would like to. I always hate it when preachers do that. You don't have to pray if you don't want. But if you'd like to join me just for a moment to take a breath, this was a whirlwind. This was an apocalyptic talk. Just take a moment and let's, if nothing else, recognize, whether you come to the class or not, that life is so constructed that creation, catastrophe, and recreation is the way it works. Of course, you'll be a whole lot more spiritual if you come to the class. Amen. Just kidding.